Thank you for joining us today on Earthfile. Welcome to the program. I'm Ayola Kasim. The new Allied for Climate Transformation Consortium, which includes experts from Nigeria, Kenya, and elsewhere, in its just published statement says the hard facts recently presented by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change once again emphasize in no uncertain terms the dangers that the climate crisis poses to the lives and livelihoods of people all over the world. Strikingly, they reconfirm the disproportionate impact of climate change on the almost 3.6 billion people in vulnerable nations who are the least able to cope. Despite their limited contribution to climate change and the strong ambition in both mitigation and adaptation actions, vulnerable nations still face grave risks from a climate crisis that threatens their livelihoods and territories, and in some cases, their very existence as nations. We've seen how dangerous this can be here in Nigeria with the recent floods. From the 6th of November, almost all countries of the world will be meeting in Egypt for COP27, with compensation for countries most affected by climate change set to be a key topic. At no time in human history has the impact of climate change on human lives been so acute as it is now. There's been more call for climate action than ever before, but who is listening? We'll look at what efforts are there to take and the way forward today on Earthfile. Do stay with us. Human activities have been causing irreversible damage to our climate, and most people are yet to understand the impact of their actions. But many others are already living with the reality, even here in Nigeria. Towns and villages across a swath of southern Nigeria inundated by floods. Satellite images released by MAXA on the 1st of November showed unusually intense seasonal rains have drenched swaths of West and Central Africa since June, unleashing deadly floods that have affected millions and submerged farmlands in 19 countries. Here in Nigeria, rising waters have worsened a cholera outbreak. The floods, blamed by the government on heavy rains and a water release from a dam in neighboring Cameroon, have killed more than 600 people, displaced around 1.4 million, and damaged or destroyed 440,000 hectares of farmland across the country.
For many years, some of us have been crying that climate change represents a threat to the country, but it has taken an unprecedented flood to bring this to the attention of many, many people. And yet, some people are still blaming the dam in Cameroon, which might, of course, be a little bit of a factor. But clearly, the biggest factor is poor governance, weak adaptive capacities, lack of awareness, poor planning, lack of proactivity. And so unless we really begin to take concrete measures, I am afraid that the future may not be good.
Nigeria is said to be among the top 10 of the world's most climate vulnerable countries. The need to boost climate action and the efforts needed to reach the targets
and the environment
are the focus of this gathering here in Lagos, organized by the Sterling One Foundation and the British Deputy High Commission, with the theme, the transition to a circular economy, partnerships to solve present challenges.
I find it difficult to understand why we are not looking after the air you are breathing in. It's the same thing as you don't care about the food you are taking, you're just swallowing everything that's given to you. Eventually, you're going to die untimely. So the same thing happens to climate change in general. So the way media reports it, they need to focus more on attitudinal change of people. Government is me and you. Just me and you. Forget about pointing. It's you. What have you done yourself? Climate, what have you done to ensure that you are going to live longer on this planet and your unborn child will see this earth as your parents have handed it over to you? So it's very, very important for us to focus on the attitudinal change and keep it simple.
With this kind of conversation, it's going to be one of so many other conversations, but this conversation is actually targeted at the media. that have done good work with reference to creating awareness on climate change, climate action, and the need for everyone to take responsibility. But there's so much more that needs to be done. There are so many people that don't even understand what climate change means in Nigeria, and it's affecting us also. It is extremely important everyone is aware of what it is all about, also aware of what they can do to mitigate climate change in their businesses, in their homes, and within their spheres of influence.
Well, what we're supposed to do is to realize that, hey, we have a problem that's threatening our very life support systems on this planet. And one of the major aspects of it is the massive amounts of greenhouse gas pollution. And we need to reduce the greenhouse gas pollution as we promised to do in 2015 in Paris, but we haven't done it. It's rising all the time. And also, we need to start living far more harmoniously with nature. We're put here as custodians of the creation. We're not put here to destroy nature. We're put here to replenish the earth. So we need to start getting it right in our minds, our duty to Mother Nature.
In doing their bits, the foundation has partnered with various organizations to promote environmental sustainability. It has adopted different coastal communities in Lagos to ensure the oceans are free of wastes.
We have adopted beaches where we build the capacity of the youth and women in those locations, give them the equipment they require to keep the locations clean every day. So we do the flag off, we train them, and we continually build their capacity. And then we employ them. So we provide remuneration. So it takes care of job creation, capacity building, and then it takes care of course, life below water, because they ensure that this plastic do not enter our oceans and into the fish that come back to us as humans, since they are like the last line of defense to ensure that we are protected. Now that is for the beach adoption project. We're going to be planting 10,000 trees this year in partnership with the Unity Schools Alumni Association and also Green Sahara Farms across the geopolitical zones. And these trees are going to be situated in the schools. We're going to establish tree planting clubs, and it's going to be part of education for the students, and it's going to ensure that those trees do not die untimely deaths like we find so many tree planting initiatives have as an issue. And beyond that, also we're working with the Federal Ministry of Environment to establish the nation's first National Sustainability Week to further drive advocacy and the knowledge creation and awareness across the country on the issues around climate action and the fact that everyone needs to take responsibility.
The Sustainable Development Goal 13 focuses on climate action. It urges governments, organizations, and individuals to take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. Many organizations today in Nigeria are integrating climate change measures into their policies.
We bring about activities and initiatives on a community level in a way that people can understand it. So if I was to give an example, we go into communities and we have a recycle exchange hub in a place where people, first of all, need to be able to feed. And so we have recycle exchanges that are ensuring that we saw that there was going to be flooding problems. We could see that there were emissions from that plastic pollution. Just because they don't understand it doesn't mean they're not going to be affected by it. So what does that mean for us? It's saying that we have a responsibility to do better, to introduce it to them in a way that will help them financially, that will help their health, and will also, most importantly, help the environment. And you know what? We found that it's even had a greater multiplier effect. What do I mean by that? Going into these communities, we've said, bring all your recyclables. We know that that's an area that was heavily polluted. They're recycling. They're excited about it because they're earning a revenue, but most importantly, we've said we've seen a nexus between the pollution and health. And then we've introduced health insurance. So we're saying you can bring the recyclables, exchange it for health insurance in partnership with others. Because one thing we don't do at the foundation is think that we can do it ourselves. The work ahead, as we all have acknowledged, is huge. And we need partners, and we believe that SDG 17 is a great one. It's partnering for the goals. So we have the likes of Lashma working with us here, introducing health insurance for as low as 8,000 naira per annum per individual. You imagine you have individuals who are, we have a woman in Hub who's basically raising over ₦1 million a year from plastic. This is a game changer for them.
Nigeria's 2021 Climate Change Act provides for an ambitious framework for mainstreaming climate actions in line with national development priorities and set a net zero target for 2050 to 2070. The Act codifies national climate actions by mandating the Ministry of Environment to set, among others, a carbon budget keeping average increase in global temperature within 2 degrees Celsius and pursuing efforts to limit the temperature rise increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. It further approves of formulation of a national climate change action plan in every 5-year cycle to ensure that the national emission profile is consistent with the carbon budget goals and prescribes measures for identifying actions for climate adaptation and mitigation.
26 and now, Nigeria has made, again, important strides. At COP26, we announced a net zero target. And after COP26, the climate change bill was signed into a climate change law. The energy transition plan has now been released and is costed. A national decarbonization project, which I'm leading, is going on. And we also are drafting the LTS, the long-term low emission development strategy. I also know that there has been a work commission to try and turn some of the NDC policies into implementable plans. So there are some positive signs. I am hoping that we can be much faster. It took nearly 8 months after the climate change bill was signed into act to begin the implementation. I don't understand it. Why it should take 8 months to make an appointment of a Director General to commission the National Council? The commissioning of the National Council has actually happened in a very hurried way. I'm not sure they have met. It is not clear to me that the carbon budget, which we said has to be submitted, that they have worked on it. So we cannot be doing kind of one step every 7 months, then a little bit of step. This requires intensity, it requires commitment, it requires drive, it requires energy, and it requires a lot of technical know-how. So we are sometimes singing the right songs, making the right positive noises, but so much more requires to be done to really translate these plans into concrete actions.
The Act applies to both public and private entities within Nigeria's territorial jurisdiction and directs both to implement mechanisms geared towards fostering a low-carbon emission, environmentally sustainable, and climate-resilient society. The Act obligates any private entity with employees numbering 50 and above to put in place measures to achieve the annual carbon emission reduction target in line with the action plan.
I think we've made the right decision, to sign in our climate act. Climate Change Act. I think we should be optimistic. It's a good step in the right direction. Policy consistency, policy collaborations, and those things are a bit lacking, but I'm sure it's something we can work on. I also think that we don't have a choice with the way things are. The transition is important. We need to think about it. I think the debates are right. What we are calling for is a balance between social, economic, and whatever ESG is pushing as well. So the debates are right, and I look forward to seeing all the frameworks and all the implementation plans that shows this balance. Many people still see it as a CSR or a voluntary thing, things that has to be done voluntarily and things like that. There's more to it, and ESG is going to impact our economy in the short, medium, and long run. And any organization not looking at that is not being realistic, right? It's not far-fetched from us. The industries that it will produce are a lot, and we hope that people will be more open to it to listen. I also think ESG is exactly what Africa needs to become the Africa it wants to be.
Experts believe that environmental, social, and governance concerns are important for the sustainable development and exploitation of Nigeria's resources to address energy security, socio-economic development goals, and environmental sustainability. A new report from the UN Climate Change shows countries are bending the curve of global greenhouse gas emissions downward, but underlines that these efforts remain insufficient to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. According to the report, the combined climate pledges of 193 parties under the Paris Agreement could put the world on track for around 2.5 degrees Celsius of warming by the end of the century. This latest report also shows current commitments will increase emissions by 10.6% by 2030 compared to 2010 levels. This is an improvement over last year's assessment, which found countries were on path to increase emissions by 13.7% by 2030 compared to 2010 levels. Nigeria shows the dilemma that a country with limited contribution to climate change in the past also has to abstain from developing and exploiting fossil fuel resources if the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit is to be kept. The country's energy sector plans are at odds with the Paris Agreement's 1.5 degrees Celsius limit.
So I think the picture is varied. So some countries, I would say the UK, for example, has a much clearer roadmap to how we get to net zero. It's still challenging. There's still definitely room for scrutiny and testing, and whether we're going quicker and fast enough, and whether some of the plans are as resilient as they should be. But there's definitely a plan. There's definitely scrutiny. The full sector, the media is there to try to keep us and to hold us to account. We appreciate that. I think other countries, the target is aspirational, but it's good to have an aspirational target at least that you can start to plan towards. And I think our effort with Nigeria around the integrated resource plan would help make the energy transition plan, which is highly aspirational but incredibly important, more grounded in the reality of how people might experience energy transition. Very, very importantly as well, experience energy access in a country like Nigeria, because I think a net zero target is important. In Nigeria, where so few people have meaningful access to energy regularly, an energy access target is equally as important, if not more so. So I think in some countries, targets are more real than others. The important thing for us is to try and help countries where the targets are more aspirational become more tangible. That's the focus.
Nigeria wants to expand its domestic, regional and export gas markets. According to the International Energy Agency, no new oil field development is needed if we are serious about the world reaching net zero emissions in 2050. Nevertheless, according to the Climate Action Tracker's method based on a fair share contribution, and from a cost-efficient perspective of Nigeria's targets and policies, the country's effort is rated almost sufficient.
It's a good plan, and it's important to have a good plan. I think what we need now to underpin that plan is the kind of resourcing, not just money, but the kind of resourcing decisions that support it. So, just as with the UK, an energy transition requires significant changes to how we do everything, from public housing to energy efficiency, to where we intend to have grid access and where we don't, to the kinds of sources of energy we have, to how we have gas, for example, which, Nigeria has plenty of gas. I understand the want and desire to use it, but over time, gas will become a stranded asset. So how do we acknowledge that, and how do we plan for gas in a meaningful way during that period? So I think the plan's excellent. It's good to have a plan. I just think a lot when it comes to energy is a very complicated sector. A lot needs to come beneath that. And our aspiration is to provide that, at least to be a part of that solution, and to make sure the Nigerian government can attract the kind of money, support, private investment, expertise that can make energy transition a reality.
Nigeria has an ambitious 2030 renewable energy target, but implementation has been slow and it is not on track to meet this target. Its pandemic recovery package did include support for solar home systems, but much more action is needed here.
The finance side of it is clearly some of the hardest aspects, but the commitment, not just from the UK, but from developed economies to make the kind of climate finance sums available is real. I think that the challenge in some respects is the time delay between that commitment and the money reaching the kind of places that it needs. That's regrettable, but it's also understandable in terms of how you need to actually invest money. So, for example, in Nigeria, when you want to build infrastructure, you need an investment climate that can attract private finance to do that. That's not easily available at the moment. We've seen foreign direct investment massively reduce in Nigeria. I don't celebrate that. I want to see it increase. But in order to bring in not just public finance, but the kind of private finance, which is significantly larger, to try and build the kind of infrastructure needed, we have to have an investment climate that will attract that and will see a return on its money. So I think the public finance that governments are making available, including the UK, including the money we're spending here in Nigeria through the Climate Finance Accelerator, through our agriculture programs, through the kind of programs we have that are intended to try and help Nigeria adapt to climate change is available. It's the private finance that we want to attract that's more difficult and reasonably has conditions around how it can be spent in countries, including the UK, but where it needs to see a return on investment.
The country has one of the least reliable electricity grids, and Nigerians spend billions per year on generators. As with most African countries, the Climate Action Tracker's fair share rating means Nigeria will need considerable international support to decarbonize its economy.
Climate change action involves winners and losers, and this is not often well understood by commentators. For every action, there may be people who will lose and people who will benefit. The transition, for example, away from fossil fuel to green energy could result in some people that have high power in the fossil fuel industry losing power and new emergent incumbents having power. Some nations are still struggling to understand the way in which they can act on climate change and still keep a competitive edge. And this is the challenge that we face in making more rapid progress. And so what we need to do is continue to argue to show how we can combine climate action and the pursuit of, the good life, development, economic growth, but also to argue that, growth is not everything. Profit is not everything. And sometimes we need to put, Mother Earth, humanity, morality, justice, equity first. And it is working, but it's not working as fast. So we need to continue to press the argument and double down the diplomacy and hope that we can get more traction and more progress.
The Allied for Climate Transformation 2025, a consortium of think tanks and experts elevating the needs and priorities of vulnerable developing countries to deliver ambitious, balanced, just and equitable outcomes at the UN climate negotiations and chart a path towards greater global solidarity, brings together 7 core partners.
This is not really an alliance of countries, but of think tanks, you see, and because it is of think tanks, which is a second unique point, we emphasize analysis, research, okay? And it's not something that we cook up just horribly before negotiation. It's also long-standing. It's a long-standing collaboration among the think tanks in these vulnerable countries. So we bring rigorous, robust analysis on the table, and then we use the result of the analysis to seek intervention in ways that will further the interest of vulnerable countries. So this is one of some of the things that make it very unique. We are interested in justice, in equity, in ambitious climate action, but also in building bridges between the rich and the poor countries so that we can have practical solutions on the ground. This is not just about covering the interests of one country or the other, but because of the diversity of the membership, we think that we are able to become more balanced and more proactive and solution-oriented.
The historic 2015 Paris Agreement provides an opportunity for countries to strengthen the global response to the threat of climate change by keeping a global temperature rise this century well below 2 degrees Celsius and to pursue efforts to limit the temperature increase even further to 1.5 degrees Celsius. It entered into force on 4th of November 2016. Implementation of the Paris Agreement is essential for the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals and provides a roadmap for climate actions that will reduce emissions and build climate resilience. That's our show for the week. Thank you for watching our inbox Earthfile at channelstv.com. It's available anytime, any day for your comments and questions. From all of us here in Lagos, it's bye for now.